Is lesson number 64 and is evaluate the strategies that an economist can use to move out of a recession. Apologies for looking a bit rough this morning, but my wife and my kids are all in the bathroom, so I'm going to have to wait an hour at least before I can move in there and have a shave and brush up and be ready for the next lesson. Okay, but this is really quite a straightforward question. However, it's unlikely maybe to be asked, I'm now talking in the year 2014, it's unlikely to be asked in the next couple of years or so, because it looks as if the British economy is going to do okay. But obviously it was a very personal question to ask between 2008 and 2012, because the UK was in a recession, went into double dip, and there was a fear that we could also move into a triple dip recession. In Europe, obviously, right now they've got economic growth which is very, very low, 0%. Is it in a recession as a whole, or is it not in a recession? Greece has lost 25% of its GDP. Spain's been in a recession, 60% youth unemployment. All these pretty scary figures are going all over the world. So basically, how do you get out of a recession, which is a pretty important question as regards Greece and Spain, but I'm going to talk about it from the UK's perspective. Now, obviously, here we're talking about three policies that you can use. You can either use monetary policy, fiscal policy, or supply side policy. But a recession, by definition, is two negative quarters of economic growth. So therefore, by definition, you would like to have a negative output gap. So you're looking at demand side policies, and demand side policies are monetary policy and also fiscal policy. However, if your supply side is always really, really good, then your economy is going to be that much stronger in terms of getting out of a recession. And one of the points that I would like to make in particular is, what happens if you have a supply side shock? What happens if oil prices go up? What happens if food prices go up? What happens if any commodities go up? Which, if you listen to me, I believe that these are the biggest issues in the world today. So I believe that you've got to have very strong supply side policies, and that may take the form of direct intervention by the government to make sure that you can produce those goods cheaply. For instance, if you don't get your gas and oil from Russia, therefore what do you then do? If you don't get your gas and oil from Russia, if you fall out of Saudi Arabia, what happens if there's a war in Libya? What happens if there's a war in the Middle East? What happens if Iran and Iraq don't want to export your oil? Then suddenly those goods are going to shoot up in price. So therefore you need to have something, you need to have a steady supply of energy that is not reliant on those countries, because the world geopolitically is inherently unstable. So I like to think of myself as a modern environmentalist who is all about change, innovation, technology, and all of those things. However, you want to do well in your A2 economics, so let's move over there. Evaluate strategies that government could use to move out of a recession. Right, well, basically you can use monetary policy, and if we're using monetary policy, you all know that it's low interest rates, you can have a low exchange rate, and you can also print money, and you just talk through those policies. Low interest rates, therefore it's cheaper for consumers to borrow money, more investments, but it's cheaper for firms to borrow money, so therefore there's going to be more investment. House prices should also go up because it's cheaper to buy a house, so therefore more people will want to buy a house, so therefore house prices should rise. Hopefully we won't get a house price boom followed by a house price crash again. And finally, if the interest rate goes down, the exchange rate also falls. So we go through all of that, pretty straightforward stuff. Right, but more interestingly at this moment in time, perhaps, Mark Carney, who I consider to be a real radical in terms of previous governors of the Bank of England, is that he's got this policy of forward guidance that you've probably heard about, which basically means, all he's really saying is he's telling people that interest rates are going to be low for a long period of time. Therefore, if we have low interest rates for a long period of time, therefore firms should invest, knowing that the rate of interest isn't suddenly going to go up. So that creates more stability within the economy. And right now, I think he's pinpointed the biggest thing we need right now is growth, because we've got all of these debts. If we get growth, the banking system becomes stronger, we can then collect more taxation revenue to pay off our debts, and actually having a little bit of inflation isn't too bad because it will pay off the national debt anyway in real terms. So therefore it's a pretty radical policy. We kept interest rates low. Of course, his initial rule was that when unemployment fell below 6.9%, then he may start to raise interest rates. What he didn't realise is how successful the UK economy would be in actually reducing unemployment. So you keep interest rates low, therefore you invest and innovate with confidence. That's going to shift out the long run aggregate supply curve. At the same time, we've also adopted these policies of quantitative easing, credit easing, and the Help to Buy scheme. Right, I quite like this idea of credit easing, which is telling banks that if you lend to businesses, that the government will guarantee the money that you lend out to businesses. So therefore, there is no risk for you in terms of lending out to businesses. Therefore, they will lend out to businesses at low rates of interest and ease. There will be more funds moving into the banking to the business sector. However, I can't understand why we can't just have a government bank that also lends out to businesses, that does not charge high rates of interest. You're still working within the free market, because the businesses, by definition, are in the free market or in the private sector. They've got to go along to the government bank and say, I want to start up this business, please, and they'll be offered a lower rate of interest, which would increase investment. However, they haven't done that. Quantitative easing is all about giving the banks more cash to spend, because if the Bank of England comes along, buys maybe government bonds from the banks, in a sense is buying up its own debt, and by buying up its own debt, the banks have more cash, so therefore the banks will hopefully lend that money out to businesses and will not go up buy commodities. I've spoken about this before. Will not go out and buy commodities on the world market, which creates cost push inflation, which is actually what they've done. So we've got quantitative easing, credit easing, the Help to Buy scheme. All of these are dangerous policies because you're pushing money into the economy. Therefore, this could then create demand pull inflation. People may lack confidence in money, and therefore that could create instability within the economy. But so far it appears that the government has sort of got away with it. We have got a bit of a housing price boom now, but that's a good thing. It makes the bank stronger, creates more demand for housing. We're now building more houses. So that's helping to stimulate the economy. So far so good. A low exchange rate, hopefully that will rebalance the UK economy. I think it's a good policy, even though last year we had a record trade deficit of 2013. So people say it hasn't really worked. It has worked to a degree, because we are selling more exports to the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, and also the MINT countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Nigeria and Thailand. So overall, these policies appear to be working, right? Don't worry about a government bank. Never put that in your A to answer. I've just shoved it in there just to provide a little bit of thought. However, all of this is a risk. Okay, this is a massive risk, because if you print money, it could create a massive rise in demand. Things could get out of control again. The banks may have not learnt their lesson. They're still paid on commission. Therefore, they want to lend more money out. Therefore, we get a housing price boom. Therefore, we end up very much like the nice decade. Then we have another recession, and we're in big trouble again. So Mark Carney has to steer this difficult path that we are following. However, in a sense, I just think he's buying time whilst the government will enact its own supply side policies. But as regards A2 economics, you can clearly say that monetary policy is a little bit risky at this moment in time. At the same time, with fiscal policy, we could use fiscal policy. The government isn't tending to use that. Well, it is using it because it's reducing corporation tax, which is part of fiscal policy. But it's not really using the fiscal policy in terms of creating more demand within the economy. However, you can talk about it. If we increase G, if you use Keynes' arguments, then we're going to be okay, because that's going to lead back to a rise in taxation revenues. However, it will lead to a rise in national debt. Then from there we have all the problems of the crowding out effects, more interest payments, less confidence in the UK economy, a lack of fiscal sustainability. Will other countries lend us money, or will people want to buy out government debt? Therefore, we could end up like Greece, where they have to pay 30% interest on their debt. Therefore, you have a sovereign debt crisis. Therefore, there's a lack of confidence. Therefore, people stop spending money. Therefore, we have a great big depression. So that's the reason why that method is still rejected, although we're still spending a lot of money to increase AD, or we could decrease taxes, and then we go down the Laffer curve argument, creates more enterprise. We have an enterprise economy, therefore our economy will eventually do well. And in a sense, we go right back to the first lesson I taught on macroeconomics, which is all about investment, innovation, technology, labour market flexibility, productivity. If you get all those things correct, your economy is going to do pretty well. Okay, so those are the two demand side policies, but quite clearly, if we really want stability, right, we want a really, really good supply side. And this is where I think supply side may be changing a little bit, because our economy is always under threat of a big rise in oil prices or a big rise in any commodity prices. So therefore, I think you have to use investment and innovation to create new ways of doing things. I started this talk by talking, what happens if the Russians stop selling us gas? What happens if there's a war in Libya? What happens if the Saudis suddenly decide they don't like the British anymore? What happens if the Shia Muslims take off? All of these are really major important issues. And I believe a country, particularly in the UK, where you have all of the right skills, all of the correct skills in terms of producing goods, if we have those skills, then we can really produce our own energy. And that is really, for me, it's an intervention supply side policy, but it's something that is absolutely vital that we would do. So if you have that as a strong policy, you create macro stability within your own country. And because we're also part of Europe, imagine if the whole of Europe did this. There's 500 million people living in Europe. So I believe, I'm a member of the Green Party, that we have to sell this idea of the Green Party not as a backward party, but the Green Party in fact is someone that is cutting edge. We're cutting edge in terms of what we do. So anyway, I believe that really what we're doing here with the monetary policy and fiscal policy right now is we are buying time for our supply side policy to take place. We're buying time, a low exchange rate, which I'm going to talk about in the next session, will help to rebalance the UK economy towards manufacturing, and at the same time with supply side measures, particularly intervention supply side measures, we can go out and create a much stronger economy that is stronger in terms of not being as affected by a supply side and a demand side shock. Because if you can produce all of your own energy and all of your own food, you're safe as an economy, and then you can innovate and invest from there. But better off to do it as a larger trading bloc. And I believe that's crucial for the future performance of the UK economy. But then again, I'm not in power, and I'm seen as being a little bit off the wall. However, I'm sort of quite firmly convinced that that's the route you have to follow. Okay, but traditionally, for A2 economics, how do you get out of recession? Monetary policy, talk about it. However, there's a big risk. Demand pull inflation, MV equals PT, everything like that. Fiscal policy, maybe the supply side part of fiscal policy, decreasing corporation tax, is more, reducing welfare benefits is now more important. We can't just continue to follow this route of increasing G, getting an ever bigger national debt, because eventually you have to pay that back, even though Anatol Kaletsky says, well, actually you can just print loads of money, which is actually what we've done. We printed £225 billion and bought up our own debt. And people, that's gone under the radar of not only people in the UK, but also economists and journalists within the UK. So you can actually, in a sense, print money. I mean, I wouldn't do it all at once. I wouldn't just print £1.4 trillion and pay it all off, because that really would cause a crisis of confidence in the UK, and the exchange rate really would collapse quickly. But we can do it slowly. However, ultimately, we're talking about supply side, and I'm not talking about the sort of supply side which says, right, decrease in income tax, decrease corporation tax, reduce welfare benefits, more training, all of that supply side. I'm talking about intervention supply side in terms of creating new technologies that will enable us to become maybe self-sufficient in energy, which would be a huge bonus for the UK. Okay. But as traditional economics, there are three policies, talk about them all, but there are drawbacks in all of them. Remember, supply side is always long term. But explain why it's long term. And in the short term, we may need demand side because we've got a negative output gap. Thank you.